All right, welcome back. Uh, Display is not working today, but I don't really need it, so unfortunately, I cannot show you stuff on the screen, but it'll be okay. Please sign into the attendance. We're just about done. Really, we're almost done. We have class. We have class on Thursday, and that'll be the last day of new material. For class on Tuesday, that's a week from today, I will go over one of my old finals. I haven't decided yet. I'll let you know by Thursday which one I'm going to do. So I encourage you to do weekend. So at least budget 90 minutes or so over the weekend to go do one of the old exams. You're ready now. There's no new material. You're done. You're clapping. Yes, you're almost done with it. You're almost summer's ahead, right? Not really. No, there's no summer break in law school. There's not. I mean, there is, but there isn't. It's a year-round project. If you're doing nothing this summer, it's probably not the best use of your time. Sorry, it's true. It's true. Do something. Take a class or something. Get an advantage. It's anyway. Any questions? All right. Today we're moving on to a topic which is more modern, right? We always talk about the common law rules and the modern rules. Today's topic is focusing a lot on modern rules. Now, again, I want to repeat a point. When we're dealing with leaseholds, when we're dealing with landlord-tenant relations, we are not talking about fee interests, right? The rules for fee simple determinable, right? Fee simple subject, condition, subsequent. All those rules are in one bucket. Leaseholds are different, right? We have the term of year lease, we have the periodic tenancy, and we have the tenancy at will. These are completely different areas. Do not confuse. There's overlap. For example, a landlord might have after a term of years lease finishes, so there's some overlap in terminology, but they're very different. If there's some lease, for example, tenant will have a lease in Blackacre so long as X, Y, and Z happens, right? You say, oh, so long as it's a lease determinable, right? That's probably not the right answer. The New York courts sort of recognize different types of interest, but generally we have the three, and that's what you have to fit themselves into. All right. Today we will talk about landlord-tenant relationships, and in particular, situations where the landlord is doing the bad thing, right? In both Berg and Sir, the landlord behaved alleged breach by the tenant. These cases illustrate a tension, right? When a tenant breaches a lease, what should a landlord do? At common law, there was a very simple answer. He did whatever he wanted. And in the modern approach, the landlord has his hands tied and he's required to use legal processes, right? All right, so let's start by talking about default. Okay. Who's up? Who's next? Okay, Miranda. Patiently waiting all weekend, right? Miranda, what's a default? DEFAULT, default? What does it mean to default? It's used over and over again in the readings. What does that phrase mean? Yeah, breach, right? Whenever you see the word default, just think breach. It's the same thing, right? You had some responsibility, some obligation, and you fail to comply with it. You'll see this in other classes. If you default on a mortgage, for example, right, you fail to pay your rent. A default is a breach. It's just another word. Okay. So, Tiffany, let me ask you a question. When a tenant defaults or breaches on the lease, what are the options available to the landlord? Sure.
If a tenant the landlord
Yeah, can you self-help, right? What's self-help? Right.
and basically has a means to evict the tenant without using.
Right. So what might an example be of self-help to evict a tenant? What might a landlord go ahead and do?
We could change out.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Change out the locks, right? At common law, if tenant defaults, the easiest maybe not easiest, but one of the most common is to deal with that situation was to change the locks. Literally. And by the way, you could sell their stuff to cover the back rent. Right? So a combination of locks, seize whatever is inside the unit, and sell it to satisfy. One of the upshots or one of the consequences of this sort of sell is the tenant would not accrue more unpaid rent, right? So let's say rent was due in the first of the month, he didn't pay, you would evict him that same month, and he would accrue another month rent, which sort of builds up debt. All right. But in the modern era, we will see that self-help is sort of frowned upon. The courts don't like it. And as a consequence, courts will allow people to stay in their properties for much, much longer. All right. But Nick, let me give you another question, right? Let's say the default is not failing to pay rent, right? Let's say that let's say it's a 1-year lease, term of years lease, and the tenant stays over and he keeps paying rent after the 1 year's up. What might the landlord do in that situation?
I guess he could, as long as he's still getting paid.
Yeah, what do we call that? What's that called? What's that phrase? Yeah, sufferance, correct. Fancy it's sufferance, correct. In theory, at least, if you have a holdover tenant who stays beyond his term, that's a default, right? The lease says you stay for 1 year, and staying beyond the year is basically a default. But the landlord can treat him as a tenant at sufferance and create perhaps a periodic tenancy or maybe a tenancy at will so he can stick around. Right? So the landlord has different options at his availability, all the way from self-help to just extending the lease. Right? But the landlord may not want to extend the lease for a number of reasons. Maybe he has another tenant willing to come in. Maybe he doesn't like the current tenant. Maybe the current tenant was a problem, didn't pay his rent on time, was difficult. So in these cases, the landlord may choose to take matters into his own hands, which leads us to the first case, Berg v. Wiley. Is that a hand? No, there was a hand though. Maybe it's okay. Was that? That's okay. All right. Berg v. Wiley. All right, Nick, you want to start us off the facts in Berg?
Wiley is a landlord, and he leases it.
Okay. Before we go too far into it, what? Oh, Abby, was that a hand?
No.
You guys, no, you're messing with me. Okay. So Nick, before we go too far into what happened to the property, walk me through the terms of the lease because I think the terms of the lease are important here. Okay, so first, and I'll come back to you in a second, the tenant has to bear the cost of repairs or remodeling, right? The fact that this term is in the lease suggests that the landlord knew there'd be modifications probably done, right? That's not a common term, but if you're building a restaurant or whatever, a pool hall, whatever it was, you're gonna have to make renovations. Okay. What's the second one, Nick? Okay, this point is also very important, right? The tenant will be here for about 5 years. The landlord owns the property forever. The landlord does not want permanent changes to be made to the unit that might make it harder for him to relet to someone else. I'm sure you all have similar provisions, like you can't paint walls in your apartment, this sort of thing, right? You can't make permanent changes without written permission. And it's written, not just oral, written permission. So again, this lease sort of anticipated changes will be made. All right, what's number 3? Okay, so let me pause there. Thank you, Nicholas. This is a somewhat common term in a commercial lease, right? I'm sure you have it in a residential lease. I suppose you can operate your residential apartment for a commercial reason. You probably don't, but you could. But in commercial leases, this is actually, I think, pretty common. The tenant must operate the business in a lawful and prudent manner. And so there are two two criteria there, lawful and prudent. So Will, let's do the first one first. This may sound like an obvious question, but it's not. What does it mean to operate a business in a lawful manner?
To operate in a lawful manner, you have to follow the code set out, and then you also have to.
Okay, so let me ask you the follow-up question, which is harder. Who gets to decide whether the business is operating in a lawful manner? Which branch of the government?
Legislative branch.
So does the legislative branch come in, the members of the state house inspect the
No,
inspect the
they set
branch?
the laws.
Okay, so maybe the health inspector. So does the mere fact that a health inspector issues, let's say, a fine, does that mean in fact that the business was being operated unlawfully?
So the fine.
Here's the fine. Where did they go? Go to the courts. And what happens if the trial judge disagrees with them? And what happens if the appellate court disagrees with them? Say it's you see where I'm going with this, right? Defining what it means lawfully is actually very complicated. Do we simply say, well, just read the code? Well, often the code is not self-executing, right? You can't just read a code. Health inspectors. Well, sometimes health inspectors screw up, right? Government officials are not perfect. They're not gods, right? They may issue a citation fine and turns out maybe they misunderstood the code, or maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they thought that maybe they measured the width of a door frame and they measured they mismeasured. As a result, they issued a fine saying your door is enough. Maybe a court overrules, saying, well, the court says that this agency read the code wrong, or maybe the appellate court says that this regulation itself was illegal. Or maybe the state Supreme Court says that this regulation was unconstitutional, right? There are a million different ways in which we could define, I mean, not a million, but there are a lot of ways we can define lawful, many ways. Now, Marissa, let me ask you a follow-up. Can the landlord decide for himself whether the tenant is operating in a lawful manner? Why are you hesitating? You're hesitating. That's good. Why are you hesitating?
Because I'm not 100% sure, but I would say yes, because if they felt like they were.
The landlord to decide for himself what the law is. Why is that perhaps problematic? I don't mean this in an insulting way, but are landlords the best judge of whether tenants are violating the law? Why not?
Because sometimes they turn a blind eye and sometimes they just do what they.
The evidence to perhaps be strict. I mean, Marissa, last question for you. If the landlord thinks the tenant's violating the law, who should he call? Not Ghostbusters. Who should he call? Sorry, that was bad. That was bad. Who gonna call, right? Yeah, call the health inspector, right? Seriously, if you're a landlord and your tenant's running a restaurant that's not in code, you call the inspector. They come in for an inspection and they'll check if there's anything, right? But there's a risk when the landlord can decide for himself what the law is, right? One of the reasons why we have a legal process is some neutral arbiter can decide, here is the law and here's the answer, which is why self-help becomes tricky, right? Because let's say the landlord is wrong. Maybe he coded himself. Maybe the restaurant is complying with the law. All right, so that's lawful. Pedro, the other word that we got a minute ago was prudent. What does it mean to operate your business in a prudent manner? Man, what does that mean?
A reasonable manner.
Oh, you gave me the other one. Yeah, reasonable. The reasonable person, right? My favorite person from Torts, right? The reasonable person. A little bit more, my friend. What does it mean for what does it mean for a lease to be breached if you don't operate it prudently?
It means you didn't follow what was set out in the lease.
All it says is prudent. You got one word. That's all it says.
To the standard of the person who.
Oh, that's
the
good.
meeting of the minds.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good one. I'll answer. It's a good one. I'll answer. Meeting of the minds. Yeah, standard. That's good. That's good. I like it. Good job. Right. So anyway, but I'm trying to get at is, even if we agree that this lawful manner is going to be very hard to enforce without a court order, this other word in the lease, prudent, doesn't rely on the law, right? Prudent does not rely on some judicial decree. Prudent does not rely on some health inspector issuing a code. This one seems to be that the landlord can terminate the lease for any reason or no reason at all. I mean, if we take Prudent seriously, right? He's, well, I don't think you're operating reasonably. Well, what the hell does that mean? Is that a subjective standard, right? Is that whatever the landlord thinks, right? So again, Berg signed this lease, right? So he knew what the term he was getting in with. But if we focus on the prudent part, all leases are basically subject to termination at will, because I think you can make an argument that any business is not acting prudently. All right. Okay. One other point, Christina. I'll see if I can ask this question. Does a landlord have to behave prudently?
I would say under common law, no.
Is there any term in this lease that imposes a duty on the landlord to behave lawfully or prudently? So if like the landlord wants to be Spider-Man hanging off the roof, right? Is that okay? Yeah. If you notice If you notice the lease here is very one-sided, as most leases are. The landlord imposes all these obligations on the tenant, but at least what I read so far, there are no obligations imposed upon the landlord. And that's actually, it's common, but that's there. So we have to wonder, what does it mean lawful, what does it mean prudent? All right, Jen, what was the fourth term of the lease that was kind of important?
The tenant reserves the right to take possession of the premises if the lease is failed and
Absolutely right. Thank you, Jen. What does that mean that the landlord reserves the right to retake the premises at his discretion? What does that mean?
basically if he feels that any of the other three like clauses haven't been fulfilled or they've been
Good.
he can-
I just, what does it mean to take? This word take, right? What does take actually mean here? Does it define what take means?
reclaim ownership of his property.
Reclaim ownership. And how would one reclaim ownership of a restaurant? And how do you kick them out? Change the locks. Yeah, you give me the right answer. You're pushing by giving the right answer, right? That means you change the locks, right? I suppose it means if the landlord really wants to be serious, he can go and literally pick up the tenant and drop him off on the curb. Well, that might result in some violence. I mean, look, it almost happened, right? But at a minimum, that means you change the locks on them. Preferably when they're not in the unit. It's actually changing locks when they're inside is very hard. Because I mean, look, I don't want to be dramatic, but you see these like videos online where people are getting evicted and they basically stand in the door frame. You've seen these, right? And they don't want to be removed, and you have to tell the sheriff to basically drag them out in cuffs. So I mean, it could be a very violent altercation. All right. So thank you for that, Jen. Okay. So we have these 4 conditions of the lease. The lease begins between Wiley and Phil Berg in 1970. And for about a year, he runs a pool hall that sells beer and other meals. Sounds like a wonderful place, right? I don't know. What do I know? All right. And about a year later, Brianna, what happens?
The sister, but if that's the point that takes over the lease.
Okay, so takes over. Just be a little bit more precise. What happened? What's the actual legal move that's made?
Like it was transferred to her.
Don't say transfer. What's the legal term from last class? What's the terminology we use?
He assigned it.
Assigned or a sublease? Which one was it?
I think it was assigned.
Final answer?
Yes.
Okay. What's an assignment, Brianna?
It means when you have someone take over the lease.
What does take over mean? We gotta get.
I'd be honest, I kind of don't remember much.
I know that was all the way on Thursday.
Then Easter happened, and I think I don't remember Sunday either.
Easter. Okay, but you're blaming the bunny and the eggs. So, not too much Manischewitz? No, any saters? No. Sophia, save us. What's an assignment?
Takes over all of the responsibilities of the lease.
Correct. Okay. An assignment is when a tenant takes over all of the responsibilities of the lease. In this case, Philip, the brother, gave everything to his sister. He reserved nothing for himself, so he's out of the picture. And Sophia, did the landlord consent to this assignment?
Yes.
As he had to, right? And I'm sure he provided written consent. So again, the landlord knew this was going from was it Philip to the sister, right? And the sister would open up Kathleen would open up a restaurant in this location. And presumably the sister was aware of all the terms that she had to get consent for repairs, then she had to operate in a lawful, prudent manner. All right. I see the flip. I noticed that, right? It's good though. You guys are smooth. You know the routine. You're class 27, right? You're ready to roll. So Brianna, how did the Family Affair restaurant go? How was that establishment? Would you want to go eat there? Yeah, it wasn't the best. Yeah, I think you maybe want to. You would not have Easter brunch there, right? I think. No. Do you have Easter brunch? I don't know. I can't eat anything this week. I'm just eating matzah all week. I got nothing to eat. It's very hard to eat anywhere. Very hard to eat anywhere. No, I was actually on a plane yesterday. It was actually funny. I had to explain to the flight attendant, like in the flight, I was like, "Hey, no more masks," and give a mini little lesson on the spot. Yeah, I did. What else am I good? This is my job. I was actually sitting in the front row, so it was actually very easy to do it. But anyway, all right. Right. Anyway, so she runs a restaurant, and Brianna, I just want to be precise. What did the health inspector actually say here? Let's just be precise here. Good. Okay. Did he issue a fine?
No, but I think he gave her like a list of changes that she needed to make.
By a certain date, right? Okay, about a month. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So this is usually how government inspectors work, right? They come in, they do an inspection, they say, okay, you are not in compliance with code. You have to do X, Y, and Z by a certain date. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z by a certain date, we will issue a fine. Or if these are really serious, issues, they may shut down the restaurant. It's very rare. I mean, I guess it happens, but it's very rare that an inspector shuts you down immediately or issues a fine immediately. Usually, the government must give you some notice and opportunity to actually address the issues. I think it'll be unfair. Now, I guess if they walk in and there's rats crawling around everywhere, it's just they might just say, okay, you're shut down. So this is immediately inhospitable. Okay. All right. All right. So she gets this notice. And Ryder, what happens after she gets this notice?
So she gets this notice, and then she shuts down so that she can renovate and work.
Well, okay. So what does she actually do? Just, I mean, the fact that you're probably in dispute. What's its objective? What does she do?
She's trying to fix
Does she fire her staff?
No, everyone go home for it.
Oh, you're so nice. You think the staff's supposed to come back on that Monday? No. Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Ryder. Okay, so she does nothing for a month. July 13th is the last day. I'm sorry, it was 2 weeks, Brianna. I'm sorry. I thought it was longer. You're right, because it was a 2 week period. I'm sorry. I apologize. So you were right. My mistake. It was a 2 week period. She dismissed her employees. That means you're getting fired. I mean, this happens. Is the 59 diner by the Five Guys still closed? The one right by on Shepherd, near 59 and near the Audi dealership. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Is it still closed? There was a diner on 59 and right by where the Audi dealership, like Five Guys. Halal Brothers. I'm sorry, wrong one. Yeah.
We're gone.
It's gone?
Yeah, they're
Anyway, it basically they just what happened?
gone.
It's gone? Because like 8 or 9 years ago, they just put up a sign saying basically closed for renovations or something and never reopened. And like it was just closed for years. I haven't been there in a while. Okay, so she puts a sign saying closed for renovations or closed for remodel. So when you see a restaurant that's sign saying closed for remodeling, it means it's probably never coming back. I mean, it's actually sad how many restaurants closed during COVID. It makes me very sad. Like I loved across the street Andalusia. You ever gonna go there? Probably not. And Mia Bella right across the street. I love those places. They'll close. There's still chains on the door if you actually go close to them, right on Caroline. It's dreadful. Anyway, closed for remodeling. Place a sign in the window, and she said she wanted to close for a month to comply with the code. Now, I think Ryder said that it's probably likely that she had no intent to actually comply. So Jackie, if you're the landlord, right, and you see this your tenant put up this sign saying closed for renovations, what what do you start thinking? What's going through your head? Yeah, you get suspicious. Why are you suspicious? And if they leave, what happens to you? You're screwed. Yeah, it's a legal term. Yeah. Raise for lock, right? You're screwed, right? Why are you screwed? You're not getting your rent. And even worse, they may leave you with a building that's with health problems, right? In other words, not only are they leaving you with no rent money, you're not going to have to deal with a bunch of cockroaches, whatever else issue they have, which is going to make it harder to rent out to another tenant. Okay. Kendall, let me ask you a question, please. If you're the lawyer, right? If you're the lawyer for the landlord, Wiley, what do you advise him at this point when you see the sign get put up in the window? What's your advice to him?
Well, at the time it was common
Yeah.
to change the law.
You would tell him to change the locks, right? Yeah. I think her advice is actually sound, right? Or maybe not. I don't know, right? At common law, right? At common law, self-help was permissible. So you could just tell them to change the locks. And we don't know if Wiley actually talked to a lawyer. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but we know what he tried to do next. So, Hayden, what happens next is kind of weird, right? I mean, this is one of my favorite cases in the book because it's just so bizarre. Right? I'm just trying to picture this in my head, right? What's going down in this restaurant. So, Hayden, just try and walk through what happened after the sign went up in the window. It's weird.
Well, Wiley showed up.
He showed up, yeah.
changed-
Upside down, more precise. No, he showed up. Yeah, go on.
changed the locks, and Kathleen and her friends were in there, like, tearing down the paneling. They're quote unquote renovating the place, but
Okay, so Caden, just let's take a step back. What? There's a dispute of facts, right? The landlord says X and the tenant says Y. That's always happening. But let's just presume Wiley's correct here. Why might the tenant be stripping stuff off the wall? What value would that even have?
sell it or just say screw you to the landlord or.
Yeah, anyone else who actually knows about renovations? What's the value of stripping stuff off the walls? Yeah, Ryder? Copper. Is that right? So she was stripping the copper wiring. Is that right? Yeah. I don't know. I always think in this case, I never know why. I mean, is drywall valuable? No. It's a wiring that. So you think she was stealing the wiring
No, but I don't know.
or stealing? Was it catalytic converters? Everyone's getting stolen now. That's the new thing that people are stealing? I don't know what the hell a catalytic converter is. I couldn't tell you what it is. My car thankfully turns on this morning. Yeah. All right. So the landlord comes in and watches her stripping the walls. Exactly why we don't know. She denies it, right? She doesn't agree. Okay. So then, and this is the weirdest part. Kathleen sees Wiley hanging off the awning, like a Spider-Man routine. I'm just trying to picture this. I can't. Now I don't know if like he's hanging upside down like a sloth, or like he's just hanging with his hands. You don't do the sloth encounter at the zoo. Don't save your money. It was such a ripoff. I paid an obscene amount of money, and you got like 2 minutes with a sloth, and you get to like just like that, and that it's not worth it. I was really annoyed how much money I spent, how little time I spent with the sloth, because the sloths are very like shy animals. So this one, oh, he's not in the mood to socialize today, so too bad. Like it's like, oh, he just want to come down. Okay, sorry. Okay, and that was it. And like I'm like, okay, that's nice. You pet their sloth, and then anyway, so I was hanging like a sloth upside down, or he was hanging with his hands. But he was hanging. So then Kathleen calls and then Wiley calls the police. Okay. And then Abby, what happens next?
They basically tell them to preserve the status quo, so to like just leave the situation. And
I mean, honestly, what could the police or the sheriff have even done here? Do they even have any license or ability to actually do anything here?
no, I mean they can't really make a decision based on the lease.
Why? Okay, let me ask this question a little more pointedly, Abby. Could the police have decided on the spot if the lease breached?
No.
Could they have decided whether the restaurant's operating in a lawful manner? Well, one more question. Didn't this health inspector say you must make these repairs by X date and she didn't make those repairs, wouldn't that be enough?
No,
Why not?
because they're administrative agencies, so they don't know the next step of that
Ah,
agency.
maybe there's an appeal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So, I mean, if you're the landlord and you have this, there's a health inspection, they put a notice on the door, right? That's on the door, so it's public for everyone to see it. It says you must make repairs by a certain date, and she made none of the repairs by this date. Why can't you just come in and say, she breached it? Because that's not the end of the road in the process. So the cops and the sheriff are like, look, don't bother us with this stupid stuff, right? Don't do anything stupid. Just keep the status quo. That is, we'll just maintain things where they are now, and go talk to your lawyers. As they say, go talk to your lawyers, right? That's always what people want to do. Indeed, Wiley talked to his lawyer. And Courtney, what did the lawyer tell him? Change locks, yeah. And when did he do this? Was she in the unit when he went to change the locks? No, the second time. No. Okay. So he goes in and changes the locks. Was there still time left in the lease? All right. So here's the question. Could the landlord take this action with, I think there were 16 months left in the lease? All right. And we also know, by the way, that a new tenant came in August 1st. So I think that does factor into the decision. He wants to get Berg out, right? He wants to get her out. He wants to bring in a new tenant who would not have, hopefully, health violations. I've actually tried to find the location of this restaurant. I was not successful. I spent a not insignificant amount of time looking at old newspapers and address directories. I couldn't find it. I want to find out where it was. I think I might have found it, but I wasn't positive. But I tried to find a picture and I was not able to. So I failed. But I tried. I spent some time thinking about this. All right. So then, about 2 weeks later, Berg sues Wiley. Right. Is there any allegation that she had failed to pay her rent? Right. So what did Berg sue him for? What was the cause of action? Very good. Thank you. What is wrongful eviction? Yeah, I think that's right. It's an eviction where there's no actual default, right? There's no actual breach of the lease. Okay. So Berg claimed that removing her with 16 months left in the lease, she'd been up to date with all of her rent, was wrongful. All right. Alex, what did Wiley argue in response? He had a couple arguments that some of which are better than others. Yes. Well, that's true, but Alex, what was the significance of the fact that she closed her restaurant, according to the landlord, right? What does that act signify that she closed up a restaurant? Abandonment, right? The landlord claimed that she that she abandoned the property. Does that argument make any sense, Alex? At least with the facts here. Did she abandon the restaurant? What happened? Why couldn't she go back to the restaurant? Well, no, but eventually, why couldn't she go back to the restaurant? What did the landlord do? He changed the locks. Right? So the landlord's like, I didn't evict you. You abandoned the property. This argument is kind of weak. The reason why she abandoned it, if at all, was because he changed the damn locks on her. All right? You can't enter a property if you don't have the key. I guess you could break into a window and hang like Spider-Man, right? But that's not a good idea. Trying to think of this. How is he? I mean, how do you hang an awning to look inside? It must be a very high awning. I'm trying to picture this, and I can't. I wish there was like definitely it'd be on TikTok in 5 seconds. You know, this guy's like hanging out my window, right? You know this would have been a lot funnier if we had a video. Oh, that'd be cool. In like 20 years, property books will have like these big video clips you can watch, but maybe later. All right. All right. Amar, what was the measure of damages? What damages did the tenant seek here?
$1,000 lost profit, for lost chattel.
Okay, so how do you think they went about calculating the lost profit? What do you think they would have figured out?
I think they figured out from their rents and like the profits that they would have earned as the restaurant and if it was successful or not.
Over what period of time?
I'm gonna say it's probably from the time when she was locked out until the new tenant,
Well, how much time was left in the lease, Amar?
16 months.
So you want to try again?
16 months when
I think that's right. Right. In other words, he had about a year and a half left in the lease, and during that time, she would have made X profit per month. And they probably calculated had she stayed in this restaurant for 16 months, here's what she would have made. Now, it's not clear that number actually works because there were health problems, right? Restaurants with health code violations tend not to do quite as well. So maybe they discounted it. I don't know. I don't have the trial court record in front of me. And then what's this damage to chattels? What do you think that was? How do you think they came up with that number, more?
I think it's like what she might have brought into the restaurant to help it run and everything.
Yeah, that might be renovations, remodeling she made. I don't know if they discounted the copper she stole, right? Or I'm not sure. But I mean, they awarded damage for in the trial court. All right. Okay. Now what happens on appeal, Sean?
On appeal, they like two issues.
Okay.
The first one was like whether she intended to retain possession.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do that one first. Did she intend to retain possession? That's the easy one.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, obviously well, I shouldn't say obviously. It's not clear she did, right? It's entirely possible that she said, "Oh crap, my business is having one of these healthcare problems. I'm screwed. Oh, she's not here. I'm screwed," right? And she just left, and she had no intent of coming back. But then when he changed the locks in her, she's like, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I can take this to court now, right? This is something I can actually benefit from, right?" So in other words, had the landlord done nothing and just went to court to evict her, he would have been liable for a grand total of $0. But because he went to the Spider-Man shtick, he got on the hook for significant damages. All right. Holden, what's the second issue, the far more important one that's in this case?
Was it lawful whether or not she locked the tenant down?
Okay. In other words, could the landlord engage in self-help? Thank you, Holden. Right. Right. So the second issue was, could the landlord engage in self-help? Was the self-help wrongful as a matter of law? Now, the lease in this case specifically said you can retake the premise, right? It says it right in the lease. So then the question becomes for Margot, is that term of the lease valid under Minnesota law? Is it? Yeah. Well, I'm not asking under the common law, under the law in Minnesota as it stands, or as the court reads it now. Can you have one of these one of these clauses that allow you to retake the property under Minnesota law? If you, Paige, if you want to engage in self-help, how do you do so? What's the word used to describe valid self-help? How can you retake property? You must do so peaceable. What does that mean, Paige? What does it mean to retake property peaceably? Paige, let me ask you just an honest question. Do you think it's possible to take someone's business peaceably? No, but I mean, let's just be candid, right? What if you change your locks when they're not present? Is that peaceable? Right. So at least at common law, right? There was this notion of peaceable, right? You weren't supposed to literally beat up the tenant and throw him on the curb, right? You couldn't do that at any point. But your reentry must be peaceably. Indeed, even under the common law, if there's a forcible removal, you get sued for battery or something, right? Just imagine you grab the guy and you throw out the window. Okay, you're on for battery. That you can't do that even under the common law. But the Minnesota courts had never decided the meaning of peaceable. Right? They never had. Does the court decide what peaceful means here? Not really. They don't have to. Right? Instead, Jaime, what does the court do here? What rule do they adopt?
They create well, I think they first said that they can have self-help without there being perfect.
Say it again.
I thought self-help without there being preferred.
Okay. Does the court here adhere to the modern rule? Do they adopt the? I'm sorry. Do they adhere to the common law rule here?
Oh,
They adopt the modern rule. What's the modern rule, Jaime?
after you try to have you have to go through the things.
Correct. Is self-help ever permissible under the modern rule? Correct. Okay. So the court here adopts or basically rejects the common law, where self-help was sometimes permissible, and they adopt a modern rule where self-help is never permissible. Self-help is never permissible, right? Lisa, why do they reject the common law rule? I mean, what are some of the reasons they give?
It's hard to originate off of it, it's just like this area.
Well, we'll get to the summary proceeding in a minute. What are some of the risks of the self-help process that they were trying to avoid? Okay, they're trying to avoid violence, right? Violence is never good. We don't want people taking the law into their own hands. Bailey, what's another risk or another cost that the court was trying to avoid by abandoning the self-help rule? What's one of the risks of having disputes about leases litigated by people? Just it's costly. But what's some of the other concerns of having people decide their own disputes? Think of this lease, right? Are you operating in a lawful manner? Why is it problematic to have the parties sort of decide that issue themselves?
Because everyone's self-interested.
And everyone's self-interested. What does that mean?
It means at the end of the day, people want what's best for them and not necessarily what's.
Is a person a neutral arbiter in his own legal case?
They shouldn't be.
No, they're not. No man can be judged his own case. You've heard that one before, right? Okay, very good. So the risk of having self-help is a landlord might be wrong. Maybe there was a breach. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe they were operating in a lawful manner. Maybe they weren't. We do not know. Right? We do not know. And because we do not know, it's better to use the summary process. Now, Zach, what is this summary process? Lisa mentioned it a moment ago. But what is this summary process?
It's like a proceeding that speeds up like how quickly you can evict a defaulting tenant. It's like 3 to 10 days. I'd like to at least
Correct. Very good. Minnesota and virtually all states have adopted a summary process. I'll give the Texas rule in a few moments. But under this sort of summary proceeding, you can evict someone in a couple days. I mean, it says as little as 3 to 10 days. It's probably not quite that quick now. It's a little longer, but still within a month or so. And there's no need to exercise self-help and change. You can go through the summary proceeding in a few days. Now, of course, the tenant, right? Maybe if Wiley had filed a summary proceeding, the court would have said, well, you need to give them more time to come into code compliance. And maybe they're going to appeal code citation, right? Give them more time. So there's no guarantee that a landlord could have even evicted them under the proceeding. That's why I think he went rogue and just went to the Spider-Man thing and changed the locks on them. Right? We don't know. But here the court adopts the modern rule. And they say the only lawful means to dispossess a tenant is through summary proceedings. You got to use the courts. And today, the majority rules rule in, the modern rule is releases, and that's the rule in Texas and others. Okay. Questions on Berg? I like this game. The facts are just delightful. Some of the facts are pretty boring, right? For these facts, it's just because you what's happening.
Landlord evicted persons, and would not be liable for rent beyond that point.
Even so, in theory, the lease continues. Why the rent may have accumulated. Right, a choice, right? Once you evict, you're never getting money from them, right? You're never getting the rent. But if you leave in an office, not all leave in an office, the way my mind is, right? If you leave in the property, there's a chance they might pay rent, but more likely they'll never pay up. Collecting from a person who's evicted is very hard, right? Generally, if you're evicted, he doesn't have the money. Or if he had the money, he would pay his rent. I mean, that sounds obvious, but it's a true point. When you evict them, you're probably saying, I will never get this money back. Them, you're probably saying, I will never get this money back. Will, is that a hand up?
Yeah. So basically, the case goes from like using the common law rule, self-help, you should use summary proceedings, get the breach, or I mean, default, which is
And be precise, if the landlord suspects there's a breach, right? Merely saying there's a breach doesn't mean there actually is a breach, but the landlord alleges there's a breach. Yes, a proven court.
But the summary proceeding is going to give notice that the terminating the lease, and they're going to have to have like the year.
Yeah, I'll go through the hearings in a few minutes. I'll go through the process. All right. Any cases? Questions on Berg? Anyway, I like this case. The next case is also fun. Both the cases are actually very fun cases. I like both cases. All right. All right. So we got Berg. Again, I think almost every state has some form of proceedings. A common law is with a very lengthy proceeding. It was called this is some of the older books. Ejectment. EJ. ECTMENT. Ejectment. In those days, self-help was actually a speedy alternative. But today, I think every state has some form of summary proceeding. I'll give you the Texas timeline. So again, this is not in stone, but in Texas, it takes about 3 weeks to evict someone, assuming everything sort of goes smoothly. If there are always delays and delays and delays, right? So I'll give you the rough timeline. The first step is you must provide notice to vacate, right? You must provide notice to vacate. This often means you literally tape a piece of paper, or you can hammer it as well, but tape probably works, on their door saying, I am giving you notice that you have to vacate the apartment. And you must give this notice 3 days in advance to take any action, right? It must be a 3-day gap. So you put the paper up, you can't take any action for 3 days. Why? 3-day gap. Maybe there was a mistake, right? Maybe they mailed you a check that got lost in the mail, right? Maybe there was a clerical error. This is a a period of time in which you give the tenant a chance to clean things up. It was like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I thought I paid here. I'm sorry, the check bounced. Okay. If you can make it right in 3 days, then you're good. Often you can't, but in theory, at least you have 3 days to make it right, to come up to speed with the rent. Okay, so after those 3 days are up, then the landlord has between 8 and 10 days to serve the citation. Right? This is usually done through a sheriff, or basically comes there and says, we are serving this notice to vacate. There will be a hearing on a certain date, right? So the purpose here is to give the person notice that there's going to be a hearing in front of the court on a certain date. You're required to give at least 6 days notice, so usually between 8 and 10 days happens, right? So you have to give 6 days notice. Okay, then you have the hearing. These hearings are not, to Will's question, these are not, full-fledged hearings. There's a justice of the peace. Maybe the hearing might be 4 or 5 minutes long. I'm not exaggerating. It's a couple minutes. It might even be on Zoom now. Nothing's in person anymore. And the purpose of this hearing is to basically assess, okay, was your duty to pay rent? Yes. Did the tenant pay rent? No. Do you have any defenses? No. Eviction. Right? Now, maybe there are defenses, right? Maybe there was, a dispute over, were you acting lawfully, right? Maybe there's a dispute over whether you had too many people in the apartment, or maybe there's some factual disputes. But if it's the simple case where you didn't pay rent, the hearings are very brief. You have an opportunity to be heard. Maybe you ask the judge for leniency. Maybe you ask the judge for more time. Maybe they grant it. Maybe they don't. But let's say that there's no, excuses, whatever. The judge issues a ruling. Then you have 5 days to appeal the suit from the justice of the peace. Right? You might file the appeal, and the court rejects it. It doesn't go anywhere. Eventually, the appeals become finalized. At that point, the constable, the sheriff, basically puts a 24-hour notice to vacate on the door. Says you must be out within 2 days. You must be out within 1 day. So the entire process from start to finish takes about 3 weeks. Everything moves smoothly. Could be longer, could be shorter, but in Texas, it's about 3 weeks. Actually, last year, one of my students, do you guys know Joe Stevens? He's a 3L now. He's actually justice of the peace. We have a student here who's a JP, and he walks me through all this stuff. So now I know what I'm talking about. I feel confident. It's a hard job. We have in the clinic, for those interested, a clinic that helps people with eviction work, right? To help them basically to help delay evictions as long as possible, I guess, is the goal of the clinic, and keep people in their homes. So if this is something that interests you, we have a clinic that does this. Any questions on the Texas process? During the COVID pandemic, both state and federal government imposed massive moratoriums on evictions. So those cases are sort of still dragging on indefinitely. I don't have numbers on how long evictions are taking at present in light of COVID, but I'll give you some of the numbers from before COVID. In Washington, D.C., it might take more than 100 days to evict someone. In New York City, it's not 2 days notice or 3 days notice, it's 30 days notice. And it takes 3 to 6 months to evict someone. Really even longer, it takes years. The book says Massachusetts is a 2-year process. In New York, I read an article this weekend. This one guy's been fighting eviction, I think, for 4 or 5 years. It goes on forever, right? There are all these exemptions and delays and postponements and COVID and Zoom and everything else. So in some of these jurisdictions, it becomes extremely difficult to actually move someone from an apartment. And it just goes on forever. You might think, wow, Josh, that's great. People stay in their apartments. Well, it makes it harder for other people to move in, right? One of the reasons why housing is so expensive is the landlord must account for the fact that this person may never pay rent, and we're gonna have to compensate other apartments, right? And we'll never get them out, so there's decreasing housing shortages. So there are definitely two sides, but the clinic does the landlord rights. All right. All right, questions on eviction in Texas or elsewhere? Jackie?
Same for commercial.
Commercial leases are a little bit easier to evict because they're not, how we say, sympathetic, right? Because it's not someone's home, right? But the timeline is probably about the same. Well, it's probably quicker though, because again, there are fewer exemptions because there are not people living there. Okay, any questions on eviction? All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which is what happens when a tenant abandons possession. In the first case, the landlord said, "Oh, she abandoned, she shut down a restaurant." No, she didn't. You changed the locks on her. In the second case, I think there is abandonment. And this case is also a great case. I love the facts here. It's like never mess with a bored law student with time in his hands. I think it's a lesson from this case. John, all right, start us off. What were the facts in Summer versus Kreidel? He was, yeah. Everything was set for him, right? He had it all lined up, right? This poor schmo.
So Sommer leases an apartment to Credell, and basically Credell and his fiance call off the marriage.
Oh no! And what happened when you call off the marriage?
They were planning on their parents helping them pay for.
Oh no! Mommy and dad not gonna pay tuition anymore?
So
Oh
Credell
no!
writes
That's
to
mean. I'm
Sommer.
sorry. Right, but it's it happens.
Credell writes to Sommer basically asking him if he would be lenient towards them and he can keep his deposit and first month's rent
Good.
if he could just be out of the lease, and Sommer never writes back.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, John. I'm sorry, I was being mean, but I love these facts. They're great, right? So basically, Kreidel had planned to get married, and mommy and daddy-in-law were going to put the bill for rent, and it'll be awesome. It seems to think back to the marital property cases. So they did the opposite. They broke up before they got the degree, right? So they did the opposite. That's a funny story. I wonder if this was New Jersey, and in New Jersey, actually, the tuition would have been considered marital property. So I wonder if the parents are paying for his law degree in New Jersey and they've gotten divorced. Could the parents have recovered as marital? Because I don't think it would be marital property if the parents paying the tuition. Think about this more later. It just occurred to me. Yeah, because in Jersey it was that weird rule where they actually the value of the degree was marital property, but it was the parents paying for the tuition. So could the wife have claimed marital property in that case?
Wouldn't that payment be almost from the parents be considered a gift to their son? So then,
Right, but in New Jersey, it wasn't the tuition you were recovering; it was the value of the degree itself. Right, so in New Jersey, it was the weird rule where the value of the degree itself was the marital property, but even though the parents were basically paying for their lifestyle. I gotta think about that later. It just occurred to me. Anyway, everything's legal in New Jersey, right? So the law student Kreidel writes this very sober letter saying, "I'm really sorry. My marriage broke up. Keep the security deposit. Keep the first and last month rent. I can't even give you the key. I don't have the key. All right, you never gave me. Let me have this lease." And the landlord never replied to the letter. So Frank, why do you think the landlord never bothered replying to the letter?
probably have them later in like month.
Go after him when though? Because again, he just said, "I'm broke. I'm a student. I have no money." I mean, what was he going to extract? You can't squeeze water from a stone, as they say. I mean, most law students are broke. And there's on the roof. I know people getting their pizza. It's true. It's true. It's true. I'm sympathetic. I know what your tuition is, right, Frank? I mean, but why did he think he was going to collect later? That's my question.
You graduated law school and became a lawyer.
Maybe. I mean, what's the statute of limitations there? I don't know. I mean, it's possible he said, "Look, this guy's gonna be a lawyer in a couple of years. I'll just sue him for back rent in, what was it, 2 years when the lease is up." But again, law school's 3 years, so I guess if you wait a breach, you can maybe that was his thinking, right? Wait till the guy graduates and then sue him for the big bucks. But Lexi, wouldn't it have been a safer bet to just relet the apartment right away rather than risk collecting rent later and maybe losing, or even have to pay lawyers and fees. Wouldn't it just be easier to just evict the guy now? Yeah. So why was the landlord doing this? Why did he go through all this? These very like, I think inefficient approaches. What was he thinking?
Um, figure that out, but, I don't know if he's just being lazy or if he was betting on the whole bathroom thing.
But even if he gets back rent, he can get the money now. In other words, he could collect the money today, or he can maybe collect this amount in 3 or 4 years when it'll be worth less, right? Why wouldn't you go for the money today than the rent in a couple of years?
Hoping that after the
But what other additional damages are there beyond the loss, beyond the back rent? I mean, what other damages might there be? I don't think there are any penalties there, but good, Lex. Yeah, I don't have an answer to the question. I think you did a good job with my unanswerable question. I have no idea. Anyone else have thoughts of why he would do this? Maybe I'm not a landlord. My mindset's not there. Anyone have any thoughts? Yes, Brianne. So it's easier with an empty unit than to have to. All right, so maybe he said, look, I'll just let this unit sit empty, no utilities, no costs or anything incurred. Maybe that's actually a good answer. Anyone else? Thoughts? That's yeah, shot it. Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. If he had responded to the letter, leasing him, and that would allow him to rent it to another person, right? I mean, he couldn't rent it though while Bridal set a lease, right? The only way he could rent it is if the lease was up. Will?
Well, if he has that rent for the open unit, and then another unit staying on some double it.
So maybe he was having trouble filling all of his units, and he wasn't sure he could find a tenant. So in other words, if the tenant took Cradle's unit, another unit might remain vacant. So this maximizes his money. All plausible, right? We don't know why he did what he did. I'm sure he had some financial incentive. Most people do have financial incentives. All right. So the poor wedding was broken. He was a law student, and he never heard back from the landlord. Now we learn that tenant was willing to rent that unit. And Summer says that unit was not being shown since it was already rented to Kreidel. Chloe, was that true?
It was.
Was that true that you can't show because it's already being rented? Why is that not true? But is that enough to terminate a lease?
Well, no, but there was nobody in the apartment, so we would have been able to like.
Yeah, but could you? That's not my point. Who had the present interest in that apartment during that 2-year period?
The tenant.
So could he have rented it to someone else without evicting him? She's right. So this is actually an important point. I want to just clarify this. During the 2-year lease, it was Kreidel's. And unless there's been an eviction or an abandonment, he could not have leased it to someone else because that would be double dipping, right? Imagine he took another path, right? This may be to Will's point a moment ago. Let's say he leased the apartment to someone else and then went after Kreidel for rent, right? That'd be double dipping. You couldn't do that. But in theory, at least, though the apartment belonged to Kreidel, I don't know unless there was actually a release. Unless he said, okay, I'm releasing you from the lease. I don't think that Summers could have rented out the unit without releasing Kreidel from it. Because Kreidel had the present interest. He didn't want it, but he still had the present interest. Also, I'm not sure how he even found this fact out. There might have been discovery or something in the proceedings, right? I mean, how would Kreidel even know who came to visit the apartment building? Right? How would he even possibly know that? I'm guessing those discovery or something. Possibly know that. I'm guessing those discovery or something that came out. I'm not sure. Okay, so the apartment was unoccupied for about a year, and then finally in '73 he rented it to a new tenant. It's not clear he could even do that, right? Because I think still at that point, Kreidel had the present interest, but whatever, they didn't care. Finally rented it out. Summer sued Kreidel for unpaid rent. Callie, what did Kreidel respond? What was his defense? How did he respond to the $6,000 damages? What was his response? Did he object to paying any damages at all?
He said that, for the lawyer, had to mitigate it.
Ah, Callie, what does it mean to mitigate damage? You probably say this in contract law, I'm guessing.
I don't want to,
Ah, Callie, did the tenant object to paying any damages at all?
I don't think he objected to
Right. Right. Okay. Very, very good. Thank you, Callie. Right. So the tenant acknowledged he breached, right? That wasn't in dispute. But he said, I don't have to pay the full $6,000. I should pay some amount less than that. Exactly what amount, we're not sure. But he said there was a duty of the landlord to mitigate damages, right? That the landlord must take some reasonable good faith actions to reduce the amount of rent that will be owed. Aaron, at common law, in property law, did the landlord have a duty of mitigation? Why not?
because, they just said if they signed the lease, they didn't, it was regarding the tenant.
Yes. Yeah, exactly right. At the common law rule, when a tenant signs a lease, that's it. The landlord says, okay, I'll see you in 2 years, right? I'll see you in a year, whatever it is. Pay me rent every month. That's it. That's our interaction. The tenant had no duty to sort of mitigate the damages. And that had been the rule in New Jersey since the 1930s. And a majority of states followed that rule, right? The lease only conveyed a present interest in the property. The landlord had the reversion. And during the lease, the landlord did not exercise any control over the property. As a result, the landlord did not have to concern himself if it was abandonment. The landlord could stand by idly, saying, okay, it's empty, that's nice, good knowing you. And when the lease concludes, the landlord can sue to recover the full rent. That's a common law rule. But where are we? Our favorite state, the Garden State. I was just there a few days ago. New Jersey is a great place to visit. But you don't want to live there. It's like, no. I'm sorry, I'm from New Jersey. Yeah. Am I right? Am I wrong? I'm right. Thank you. I was actually in Queens yesterday also, so your backyard. We're not. I'm gonna live there either. Sorry. I visit there when I have to. I was in Staten Island for seeing parents for the weekend. Don't live there either. I stay there as sure as I can. So complicated. All right. It's an hour to go a mile. That's the word. You think traffic's bad here? Try traffic in New York. Am I right? Whatever bad traffic here, it's worse there. Anyway, we're in New Jersey. Elizabeth, what does New Jersey do? What do they always do? They do not go with the common law rule. What do they adopt? Okay. What is the modern rule here, Elizabeth? Right. Why do they abandon the common law rule and go for the modern approach? Justice and fair dealing is our favorite words, right? It's a very contract opinion, right? Similar, like you might read in a contracts class. Yeah, let me just take a step back, right? Anyway, in property law, there's a very big trend in the 20th century to incorporate contract doctrine, which is the duty of mitigation. You'll see this a lot in property too. There's a lot of contract doctrine. They talk about good faith and fair dealings, matter of basic fair equity. Then the court says, antiquated real property concepts shall no longer be controlling where there's a claim for damages under a residential lease. Right, they don't talk about commercial leases, this is for residential. Rather, these claims must be governed by modern notions of fairness and equity. If a landlord fails to mitigate damages, then he cannot recover rent from a defaulting tenant. All right. Pressman, let me ask you a question. Was this ruling retroactive? Was this ruling retroactive? You have any idea? No. That's fine. What does it mean for rulings to be retroactive?
Go back and then apply the old edition.
So let's say there were 1,000 evictions currently pending when this case was decided. In every one, does the landlord now have a duty to mitigate? Probably yes, right? I think from this moment forward, any landlord who evicts and does not mitigate is liable. Right? The New Jersey court didn't say our ruling is prospective. They just said, here's the rule. Suck it up, right? So in other words, if you're a lawyer, and this was my question to Kendall some time ago, and you advise your client, oh yeah, just lock him out, right? Or oh yeah, just don't mitigate your damages. When you reverse the common law rule, you put people who relied on the law in a very tough spot, right? In a very tough spot. So that was perhaps an unfair question. I'm sorry. It was okay, but you answered with gusto, so I appreciate it. All right. All right, but the court didn't just reverse the common law rule. They actually created sort of a standard that the landlords had to comply with, right? James, what is the standard that the landlord must now comply with?
Reasonable diligence
Yeah, that's good. What does that mean, reasonable diligence?
to attempt to re-let the property.
Yeah, that's good. So the court basically imposes a reasonableness standard, right? A reasonableness standard, and it works in a few different ways, right? First, the landlord must make a reasonable effort to relet the apartment. Right? He must make a reasonable effort to relet the apartment. Even if there are other empty apartments, he must treat the breaching tenant's unit as vacant stock. Right? Even if there are other empty apartments, he must treat the breaching tenant's unit as vacant stock. All right. Then there's reasonableness. The burden to show that reasonable diligence was used. The landlord. Wait a minute. Who breached here? The tenant. The tenant breached. Usually in a breach case, who has the burden of proof? The breaching party, right? Usually, if you go back to contracts, you think about this. In a case of breach, the burden's on the tenant to show, no, there was no breach or there's some justification for breaching. But Hayden, who has the burden here? How can that be that the guy who didn't screw up now has the burden? How can that be the rule? Correct. Why is it easiest to put the burden on the landlord here? Who is in the best position to know if other tenants came by and were shown properly? Why? Yeah, he knows. There's no real way for the tenant to know about reasonable efforts. I mean, maybe you could check whether advertisements right, whether phone calls maybe. But the person in the best position to know about reasonable diligence is the landlord, because you'll say, look, I had the apartment open for 6 months. I advertised it. No one came by. I tried my best efforts, but no one rented it. Okay, right. I mean, the courts can't force someone to rent the apartment. But the landlord says, well, yeah, Sally came by and she said she wanted the apartment. I said, no, don't do this one. Go take that one, right? Oh, then that may not be reasonable diligence, and the landlord may not have complied with the standard. And the court a number of factors. Oh, there are always factors in New Jersey, right? They're factories for sure, but they're factors. There are a number of factors to consider. Did the landlord offer to show the apartment to prospective tenants? Did the landlord use a listing agency? Were there advertisements in newspapers? And then the court says, our favorite line, there is no standard formula. Each case must be judged upon its own facts, because what the hell, who cares, right? I mean, I just imagine you're a real estate lawyer in New Jersey and you're reading this like going, what are we supposed to do with this? And then the court's like, we don't care, right? Just figure it out. So Max, let me ask you this question. So if you're a lawyer in New Jersey and you're advising a landlord, should you ever let an apartment stay vacant? What's your advice? Yeah, you're gonna want to show mitigation as best as possible. Even if you don't succeed, you're gonna try to rent it out because you're gonna be on the hook. So this is why even if you manage to evict someone in New Jersey, good luck getting back rent. Because they'll say, oh, you could evict him, but you didn't mitigate enough, so you don't get back rent. So the law, in some regards, makes it hard to evict and hard to collect back rent in New Jersey. All right. So in this case, at least, the landlord waited 15 months before re-letting the apartment. And during this time, some are allowed, I think, $4,000 in damages to accrue. The landlord increased the damages by turning away prospective tenants. Summer could have avoided these damages, but he didn't. Therefore, Kreidel is relieved of his duty to continue paying rent. He had to pay some rent, but not all the rent. We don't know the exact amount. They sent it back to the lower court to figure out. All right. Questions on Summer? My favorite part of this case is the fish, right? What's his face? A Kreidel had cited some Oregon cases in the opinion. And the lawyer for Summer is like, well, Oregon is best known for logging and salmon. And after Kreidel won, he sent the lawyer salmon and some wood wrapped in a copy of the court's opinion. I would not advise that, but apparently the lawyer found it was funny. I mean, it's kind of a jerk move. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself, but be gracious in victory. I'm guilty. I gloat sometimes. I really shouldn't. It's bad, but be gracious in victory. If you win a court case, don't rub it in the other side's face. It's because look, the law was in his side, right? The law was on the landlord's side. Just it's New Jersey, so whatever, right? But this was a victory not because of reason, but because the judges in New Jersey just don't like common law. They like modern everything. So don't send your opponent, a fish wrapped in your opinion or a horse's head in their bed. Just don't do that. And then the crazy twist was that the son of the judge wrote the opinion went on to be a tenant of Kreidel. Go figure. Small world. All right. So today, those curious, the duty to mitigate is in 42 states, including Texas. So once again, New Jersey was a couple decades ahead of the curve, but now every state has this sort of modern. Commercial leases are a different story, right? The mitigate duty is generally only for the residential leases. Yes. Commercial leases have no duty to mitigate. Okay. All right. So if you're sensing a pattern, today all states are following the modern rule. Let me wrap up. I'm actually just about done. With respect to eviction, almost every state is no self-help. Use the summary process. With respect to back rent, virtually every state has a duty of mitigation. Don't just let the apartment sit there empty. Any questions? That is all I have. You're dismissed a little early today. You're welcome. I'll see you all on Thursday. I'll be in my office if you need help.